The following news flash is brought to you by the Lone Star Lowdown, providing your daily bulletins for the commodities market. Today in history, news updates, and the inside scoop into the tides of the alternative. Markets for Monday, the 18th of January, 2016, are currently trading with gold at $1,088.98 an ounce, silver $13.94 an ounce, Texas crude $29.42 a barrel, and Bitcoin is currently sitting at about 382 U.S. currency. Today in history, Monday, January 18th, 1993. Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday is observed in all 50 states for the first time. This was a year prior to the 1994 Congressional and Executive Act of designating Martin Luther King Jr.'s federal holiday into a national day of service, a change that states didn't unanimously keep until the year 2000. In recent news, Governor Greg Abbott met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem today to discuss Texan and Israeli political relations. Abbott stated that, quote, "As governor, I am a steadfast supporter and friend of the state of Israel. The state of Texas's policies will reflect that. The governor seeks laws that would ban local and state government agencies from making direct business with Iran or contracting with private companies that conduct business with Iran. This unprecedented measure on behalf of Texan governorship is in response to President Obama's Iran deal, which lifted many of the economic sanctions the United States had placed on the people and markets of Iran. Aside from the obvious violation of the Logan Act through the political objectives set by Abbott and Netanyahu without Texas legislative overview, this seems one of the few cases in which the president has had any economic literacy over his Republican opposition. Laissez-faire French economist Frédéric Bastiat once said that when goods don't cross borders, soldiers will. Facebook executives announced today that the social media giant has launched a European division in Berlin called the Initiative for Civil Courage Online in order to combat extremism, racism, and hate speech as identified by them. Facebook is pledging over $1 million in marketing funding to put an end to free speech on their servers. This initiative was set in motion after an increase in apparent racist posts were filling up feeds as the massive influx of Middle Eastern refugees kept coming. Reuters also reported that Facebook had also hired a firm to monitor and to delete targeted posts on its platform in Germany. One has to wonder if governmental agencies weren't twisting an already limp arm. This was your lowdown for January 18th, 2016.
Evening, good friends, and welcome here on this very, very chilly night here in New York City. I hope it is warmer where you are. My name's Tom Kiley. It is a Tuesday night. In fact, Tuesday the 19th of January, 2016. It's 6 o'clock in the Central Time Zone on the Logos Radio Network. It means it's time now for INN World Report Radio. And thank you very much for tuning in. If you have been corresponding with me ever by email, you've probably gotten my post that I sent out I think early this morning or yesterday, something like that, about this week's programming. I'm trying to be a little better about that sort of thing, both in terms of letting you all know about it and, getting on the stick and getting back in touch with friends, people who have not been on the show for a while, and getting new guests for you because you certainly deserve them. You're a great listening audience, and we need to be informed now more than ever, I suppose, going into the 21st century here with all kinds of crazy stuff going on. So anyhow, that's what we're doing tonight. A great show for you, a great show for you tonight. For the first time on INN World Report Radio, and this has been long overdue. We're going to be speaking with Allison Weir from California, the journalist who is from California and who traveled some years ago. I don't know, I'm not sure, maybe it was 10, 20 years ago, but she traveled some years ago to Palestine because she wanted to find out for herself, what's the deal? What's the story? Why is this place in such turmoil? And she claims that once she did that and got there, she totally had her eyes open. She realized that she had a very, very wrong and biased picture for much of her life to that point because she'd been relying on the mainstream media. And she found the story to be quite different. And she felt that I'm going to be paraphrasing from my conversation with her, but I think she felt quite taken aback and wanted to get involved in helping the rest of us Americans find out the real story about the plight of the Palestinian people. And she's become an activist. She started a website called If Americans Knew. And she's been quite active in the Palestinian liberation movement, or at least, the journalists and websites that follow that and track that. And she's been a crusader. She's been going around the country, maybe probably even around the world, to give presentations to clear the air and to give us facts about what it is like in Palestine to live there and so forth, and the terrible conditions under which those people, the poor Palestinians, have to live. And so I've been going back and forth with her, trying to get her on the show, and for whatever reason, we finally did make a strong connection, and she'll be on the show tonight for the first time. We're going to have an introductory program with her, and then there are a couple of topics I think are very important that I'd like to try to cover with her. But she'll hopefully become a regular guest on the program, and it'll be very, very interesting. I so admire her work. She's quite dedicated. And, it's a word that isn't used much these days, or used properly these days, I suppose. But I feel that she's a righteous person. Righteous. I mean, that's what she feels in the way she's responded to the plight of these people on the, thousands of miles away. And then also tonight, later on in the program, last half hour of the show, we will be joined by Ellen Brown from California. Also, I asked Ellen to come on because she put out a great article this week. Apparently, as is urged by people like Dr. Webster Tarpley, Congress has buckled under and finally decided to go to the Fed and say, hey, we want some money for infrastructure. Okay, so I think it's in the billions. It's not in the trillions, which is what's needed, but it's a start. And I believe they're going to demand some billions of dollars at zero interest or very low interest, and start to kickstart our country and get it going again. Who knows? Maybe Donald Trump's got something to do with that, with all the talk that he's been spewing about these kinds of things. But that's going to be very, very interesting development. So she'll be on to tell us about that. And then on Thursday night, the return of Gordon Duff. Gordon Duff, senior editor at Veterans Today, an extremely colorful character. We have not had Gordon on the program for some time, over a year probably. And I don't know why. We just sort of lost connection with Gordon, but we've reestablished it. He'll be coming on. Gordon, a former Marine who served in Vietnam and in several capacities since then, apparently quite involved in the security arrangements situation, contractors, private contractors, that sort of thing, consults with numerous governments around the world. I asked Gordon to come on, not just because we haven't talked with him for a while, but I saw the film. My wife and I saw the film, 13 Hours, on Friday, the day it came out, about the attack on the American embassy, or sort of diplomatic outpost. It wasn't quite a full-fledged embassy, and CIA station in Benghazi, Libya, and the ordeal that everybody went through that was there. And it is quite timely because it involves Hillary Clinton, who was the Secretary of State at the time. Hillary Clinton was, some people call her the architect. I doubt if she's that smart, but she certainly carried out and implemented the attack on Libya. If not the architect, was not the architect, which I doubt she was. I don't think it's her idea to do that necessarily. I think people at a much higher pay grade than her give her marching orders. But I'm sure she relished the opportunity to show the powers that be, the great global financial oligarchs, that she could be dependent on just as good as well as the boys can, like George Bush and so forth, and that she could bring a government down for them if that's what they wanted. And it seems to me that's what she did. She approached this job with real gusto. The destruction of the leading country in Africa on so many indexes, literacy and mortality and child mortality, things like that. And she just brought that country down. And now it is, of course, a hellhole, especially for the women who live there. So anybody who is going to try to play games with you and make you think that Hillary Clinton is some sort of feminist and is for women, that is utterly false. Okay, she threw the women of Libya back into the Stone Age, behind the burqa. They cannot go out of the house in many places now unless they're accompanied by a male escort, even if that male is 12 years old, as I understand it. So, having seen that film and it is factoring into the election, her poll numbers are kind of slipping to Bernie Sanders. She's got email scandals and so forth. So I thought I'd ask Gordon to come on and have him talk with us. He may even know some of these contractors that were there. Very moving film in the sense that it's based on a true story. Apparently, I think 3 of the contractors who were actually involved in the defending of these positions from the attacks that were made on them were consulting with the film, and I believe were actually there on set for much of the filming of it. I personally don't think we should have been there in Libya whatsoever. And I know, friends, I can tell you sure as shooting that if the United States, led by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, had not destroyed the government of Libya, the American consulate, embassy, CIA station, whatever, would never have been in any kind of danger whatsoever, because Muammar Gaddafi, as was the case in Iraq with Saddam Hussein, were secular and kept the jihadist crazies out of their countries and protected their people from them. And there was law and order, big time. All right, so I don't think these guys should have been there under those circumstances, at least anyway. Maybe they have them guarding embassies no matter what, but there certainly would not have been any kind of attack like as what happened. And the Ambassador Stevens was killed, and along with, I think, 3 other men. And it shows very graphically how that happened in the film. Very, very interesting film, and it's timely, like I say. So therefore, I asked Gordon to come on. So Gordon Duff will be on Thursday night. There you have it. Phone line's open now, 512-646-1984, whatever you'd like to talk about. We've had, I think, a couple of more of these debates since the last program. We had I think the Republicans had another one on Thursday night, and the Democrats had one on Sunday night. And these are very, very interesting events. Let's talk about the Democratic one first. While I'm waiting for somebody to call, 512-646-1984. Who are you going to vote for? Who looks interesting to you? I saw today that Sarah Palin has come out and endorsed Donald Trump. And I got to tell you, friends, this is the strangest election that I've ever seen. And the first election that I remember as a young kid was the 1960 election. I remember it quite vividly, actually, because my grandparents, my grandfather and my father had it on the television, the entire primary season and the convention, where actually I think this was before the primaries, but I think they still had like brokered conventions back in those days. And that was because my Irish side of my family was quite proud of John Fitzgerald Kennedy running for president, and he was an extremely motivating speaker. I was only about, probably 6 or 7 years old at the time. And but I do remember it quite vividly. And since that time until today, I've not only been aware of, but I've participated in every election that I could since I was able to vote. And this has got to be one of the most strangest ones, interesting ones, for a bunch of reasons. I think the powers that be that now control both the Democratic and Republican parties have pretty much driven this country into a ditch which has made them very rich, a rich ditch for them, okay? Remember, friends, if you're a longtime listener to the show, you know that I always like to say that you're wrong. If you think this country is not working, it's broken, you're wrong. It is working better than it has ever worked in its entire history, but it's just doing that for a very, very tiny fraction of people. For everybody else, it's not working. If it truly wasn't working, it wouldn't be working for them either, would it? It would be not working for everyone, and it would get fixed really quick. But why should it be fixed when the oligarchs at the top are getting so rich off of us? Well, anyhow, we can talk a little bit more about that. Tom Kiley, INN World Report. Allison Weir joining us in about 15 minutes or so from If Americans Knew. And we'll be right back just after this.
You are listening to the Logos Radio Network. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
right, good friends, welcome back. Tom Kiley, INN World Report Radio. Great show for you tonight. Allison Weir, I'm very excited. I have not had Allison on the program. I did speak with her on the phone a bit while lining this interview up, and I must tell you, friends, I so respect this woman and her work, and I hope you will stay tuned and listen to her. This is really somebody worth listening to. Let's see, If Americans Knew. I'm going to put it in here. Hold on. And here we go. Yeah, all right. I'm looking at the website right now. So I have it all set for you. IfAmericansKnew.org and KNEW, of course. And we're going to have Allison on. Very, very dedicated person. She's written a book called Against Our Better Judgment. I think it's going to be one in a series of books. Very well spoken. And, you know, when you listen to somebody who has the courage and the power of their convictions and they are on a righteous subject trying to help people and defend people, it's a very powerful, moving experience. And that's what I get from Allison. Every time I've heard her speak on YouTube videos and on interviews and recordings, it's very difficult to try to not be moved, in my opinion, anyway. But you'll see. She's going to be on. We'll have a great talk with her. Talking about politics again here in the presidential season. Donald Trump continues to astound everybody. The Republicans are starting to, what's the term? Cotton to the fact, they're starting to resign themselves to the fact that this guy could very well take the whole ball of wax. All right. He seems rather unstoppable. And as every day goes by, he seems to gain more and more momentum. And it's because he's not, in my opinion. Now, I'm watching this guy pretty closely. Okay. And look, let me tell you this. When it comes to presidential elections, all right, I cannot say that I have always voted for the Democratic Party. That's not true. But I can say I never voted for the Republican Party. And, if the election were held today, I may change that. How about that? Now, little did I know Sarah Palin endorses the guy today. I mean, this is crazy. This is why I'm saying this is crazy. I never thought I'd agree with Sarah Palin on many things. But so far, and there's a long way to go yet. No question. Things can change. But if the election were held today, for the anti-war positions or non-intervention positions of Donald Trump alone, not just what he's saying today, but what he has maintained since the war in Iraq. Now, he says he was against it before it started, and several of us wanted to challenge him on that and have dug and looked up. And on the record, now he may have been saying this to friends and family. Maybe he's on the record somewhere. But we certainly found an extremely powerful statement by him in March of 2014. Now, the invasion happened in Iraq in March of 2004. March of 2004. The invasion itself happened in March of 2003. So this is 12 months after the invasion of Iraq, maybe even 11 months. I'm not sure which day it was in March. And this guy is excoriating this invasion. Nobody was doing that back then, not even the left. And he was saying what a horrible thing it was, the death, the destruction, how the people of Iraq would have been better off if we just left them alone. Saddam Hussein wasn't such a great guy, but he kept order. There's going to be a vacuum. Who's going to fill it? And I have never heard anyone say in the public eye, I don't think I've ever heard a politician for sure, but even more than that, celebrities talk, pundits talk, authors talk, writers talk. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone, and now I say this, if you've listened to this show long enough, you've heard me say it many times, but Donald Trump, in this interview in Esquire magazine in March of 2004, raises the dead Iraqis. What about them? What about all those Iraqi kids? They died for nothing. And that was only in 2004. When I was a child, and then into my teens, and then into draft age, the Vietnam War era lasted about 10 years. Horrible, horrible war. It lasted so long, it was so demoralizing that the Pentagon got this ridiculous idea that if they told the American people how many of them we killed this week versus how many of our guys died, it would buoy us. Well, it totally backfired. It was called the body count. And the GIs were urged to, take numbers of the people that were killed they killed or that were killed. And they just, inflated them. Anybody, because they got rewarded. Anybody, they thought that was going to help the war effort. So civilian casualties, anybody who got killed, the body count, this week's body count. And it was a disgusting thing. So now the military has done full reverse rudder on that. And far from reporting how many people were killed, civilians or otherwise, during the wars nowadays, they say, oh, we don't know, we don't care, we don't count them. Well, that's nonsense. I'm sure they count them. They're just not going to tell you anymore. So I think it was The Lancet, the very respected British medical journal, came out with a report years ago that estimated that 1 million Iraqis had been killed. Estimated. An educated guess. And that was a long time ago. So there's probably been many more. What? 250,000 dead in Syria already? So what? At least 1 million in Iraq. Probably way more than that. 250,000 at least in Syria. Probably 300 and something thousand by now. Who God knows, only God knows how many in Libya. What? 2 million? Easy. 1 million here, 1 million there. Pretty soon you're talking genocide, right? Well, they're debating yesterday in England whether or not they're going to allow Donald Trump to come to England because he's a racist, because he's an Islamophobe, and all of this stuff, all of that stuff, right? I got news.
Story for everyone to hear about how we're not gonna give in to the fear. Yeah, it's a story. I will occupy my father's house until he returns. I will occupy my father's house. He has left me with the strength.
Friends had a dropout there, but anyhow, I'm back. Let me hurry up and say, they're debating in the British Parliament whether they should let Donald Trump in the country. What a phony baloney debate! They ought to be debating on when they're going to put Tony Blair in jail, and maybe George Bush too for being war criminals. All right, because of the phony baloney war on weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist, all the rest of it, the lies, the cookbooks, the cooked intelligence. And, they're basing it on Donald Trump as an Islamophobe. He's a racist, all this stuff. Well, guess what? If he was the president in 2003, there'd be probably about 2 million Islamic people alive today that have perished. How do you call that Islamophobia? How do you call that racism? If that's racism, we need a lot more of it in the world. Anyhow, that's my opinion. And we're going to be running out of time. We're going to be joined shortly by Allison Weir. Listen, go to the website, please, logosradionetwork.com. We're doing a fundraiser. There's some very, very interesting incentives for people who donate some money. We're looking for a little bit of money for some equipment and paying fees. Nobody's making money on this. Nobody's getting rich. It's all toward infrastructure. Please consider, if you can, logosradionetwork.com. It's right on the front of the website there. We need your help. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a short break. Tom Kiley, INN World Report Radio. We'll be right back with Allison Weir. First time on the program, the person who runs the great website, If Americans Knew, all about educating ourselves about Palestine. She's a great person, and I'm very, very happy to have her.
A Virginia company has brainstormed a new idea to house aging relatives, a prefab cottage that fits in the backyard of a family's home. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, back to tell you about a great idea called Granny Pods in a moment.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
For the elderly, moving into a nursing home can be devastating. But now a Virginia company is offering an alternative, compact, high-tech cottages that fit in relatives' backyards. The company, N2 Care, says its Granny Pods are selling like hotcakes. These 280-square-foot cottages have everything a hospital room does: safety rails, lighted flooring, a defibrillator machine, and electronics that monitor vital signs. The pods can cost up to $125,000, and you have to get local zoning approval. But for elderly folks who want to keep family in their lives and still maintain their personal dignity, these prefab homes seem pretty fab to me. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
You're listening to the Logos Radio Network at logosradionetwork.com.
right, good friends, welcome back. Tom Kiley here, INN World Report Radio, every Tuesday and Thursday night here on the Logos Radio Network. And it's a great honor, friends, for the first time, and this is very, very long overdue. I've been an admirer of our guest who's on the line with us, Alison Weir, and her work. Her website, If Americans Knew, is an incredible resource. And she's an author. She's got some good books out there. Against Our Better Judgment is one of them. We're going to find out all about this. Alison, thank you so much for your work, and welcome for the first time on INN World Report Radio.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me to be on your show.
Alison, from what I can gather, we've spoken once before now on the phone setting this up. I have, read your writings. I've seen your talks and listened to your interviews and so forth. You are, I hate to use the term crusader when we're talking about the Middle East, but you're a woman on a mission, it seems like to me. A, how fair an assessment do you think that is? And B, whatever it is that you're on, how did you get started with this?
Well, I think that's probably a fair assessment. I certainly am determined to do my best to get the facts out to the American public about a subject that is extremely important, but that many of us, I think your listeners are probably different, but many Americans have no idea about the real facts about Israel-Palestine and about the significance of the Israel lobby in the United States. So I do feel it's extremely important to get this information out more widely. The way I got involved is sort of unusual. It's not a subject I ever thought I would be focusing on. I don't happen to be Jewish or Muslim or Arab, and so really, like most Americans, I had never focused on Israel-Palestine before. Truthfully, it probably, thinking back, it just seemed a very confusing issue, far away, had very little to do with me. There are many important issues around the world and in the country, so I'd never focused on it before. But then when the Second Intifada began in fall of 2000, I finally sort of randomly decided to follow the news coverage of it just to become informed and to learn what the issue was about. And when I did that, really so late in my life, I quickly noticed my background is journalism. I was the editor of a very small newspaper. I majored in journalism many years ago in college. So journalistically, when I focused on the coverage, I noticed how one-sided it was, that we would hear from and about Israelis in great detail, which was good, but then we almost never heard from and about Palestinians. Sometimes that would come, but so much less frequently, that it occurred to me that that was a problem. I wanted the whole story. So I went online. This was fairly early to do internet research. And I discovered wonderful news sources from the region itself. Discovered that it was far different than most Americans thought, far worse than the American media were reporting to us, that at that time Israeli forces were shooting and often killing largely unarmed Palestinians in large numbers, unarmed demonstrators, many of them children. In large numbers, they were injuring multitudes of them. And very little of this was being reported in the mainstream media and in the dissident media, the sort of liberal, progressive, whistleblowing types of websites, not really websites yet, but at that time magazines, had very little of this information also. They were mainly giving us the pro-Israel kind of narrative. So after a few months of looking into this, learning really how violent Israel was, how cruel its policies were, reading very, very many tragic stories, shocked at how little of this was being covered in the U.S. media. After a few months, I decided I needed to travel over there for myself to see what was going on firsthand. So in early 2001, I went over as a freelance reporter without any sponsorship. I wasn't part of a delegation. I just traveled by myself as a freelance reporter throughout Gaza and the West Bank. And that's what got me started on all of this since.
So you went over there. If I may ask, what was your reception with the authorities? I understand it's very difficult to get into the Palestinian parts of Palestine. You either have to go through Jordan or this crazy checkpoint stuff. I'm not sure what it was the case for you back then or not, but I'm assuming you went in through Israel?
I did. I landed at Ben Gurion Airport, which is sort of between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And it's a very strange situation because the Palestinians in Gaza especially, but also in the West Bank, are largely in a prison. But the West Bank is more porous and even than Gaza was even at that time. So I was able to get into the West Bank. It was logistically sort of difficult to get there from the airport because the airport taxis didn't go all the way into the West Bank. So I could only get part of the way sort of to the edge of East Jerusalem, which is the Palestinian area, and then from there get picked up from someone else from that side. So logistically that was difficult. the first time on that trip that I tried to get into Gaza, here I was traveling as a journalist with an American passport. Israeli authorities would not let me into Gaza. They had closed it off. They'd sealed it off. Nobody was allowed in and out except, Israelis. And so that was difficult. But then I did get into it. Some other areas also on that trip and since would be very difficult to get into. Israeli forces are there at all these borders, both around, now it's around Gaza, before it was inside Gaza as well, around the West Bank and inside the West Bank. Even when you're traveling within the West Bank, which is supposedly the Palestinian territory, just to go from one village to the next village over. Often there are armored soldiers and armored vehicles in between blocking your way. Now, these are, quote, called checkpoints. This is not the kind of checkpoints Americans are really used to. This is a foreign army on Palestinian territory, telling people that they're not allowed to go to school, that they're not allowed to go to the hospital to deliver their baby that day. So there are checkpoints throughout the West Bank that make it very difficult to travel. But I was able to get in, and I did travel around both Gaza and the West Bank in February and March of 2001. And I did see what was going on and ended up writing about it.
When you first arrived, I'm sure you had to have some kind of interaction with the Israeli authorities, if nothing more, passport control and so forth. Were they aware you were a journalist, and B, were they concerned about that, or did they just assume, oh, here's an American, they're going to report favorably on us?
Well, no, it was, it's very complicated. I had already learned enough about the system that if you're going to go to the Palestinian territories, don't tell the Israeli authorities that you're planning to do that, because there's a good chance they won't allow you in to Ben Gurion Airport. So when I traveled over there on my very first trip, I started out on an American airline, but I didn't realize that my ticket changed in Spain, where there's a stopover, and I actually ended up the rest of the trip on the Israeli airline El Al. And so there was a long stopover in Spain, not just quite a few hours. So I went around the international terminal, came back in what normally would have been plenty of time to check in for the rest of my trip, and discovered I was in trouble because I was supposed to have come much earlier, because there were military people there that interrogate you before they allow you on the flight. This was bizarre. I'd never experienced this before. And this was before 9/11, by the way. This was quite a few months before 9/11. So right there, they were interrogating me about where I was going to go and what I was going to do. And I just said that I wanted to visit the area. They're very suspicious, but they did let me on the plane. Later, another time, another trip, a few years later, I went over there and I decided to go openly as a journalist. So when I got into, after I'd landed, I went to the Israeli ministry where you get credentials as a journalist. I had an ID card and a letter from the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs, which is an excellent magazine covering the region. Now, I'm sure Israel does not like it, but I thought, okay, let's play the game the way this would normally be played. This is a magazine that's been publishing for at least 30 years. It's, founded by ambassadors, and it's very professional. I had credentials from that. I went in to get, an Israeli press pass.
Let's leave it right there for a second, Allison, because we have to go into break. It's a good spot, very suspenseful. Allison is on her way in for the second time, and she's going to be with the Israeli authorities. Let's see what they have to say about this. We'll be right back. Allison Weir for the first time on the program, ifamericansknew.org. We'll be right back with her.
Easy.
Good friends, welcome back. Tom Kiley here, INN World Report Radio. It has been long overdue, and I'm so happy that finally we've connected with Allison Weir. Her organization is If Americans Knew, ifamericansknew.org. And, this is Allison's first time on the show. So this is kind of an introductory interview. And Allison, I was just asking you about your, how you got started with all this. And you were telling us about your second trip to Israel and how this time you wanted to sort of play by the rules and declare yourself to be a journalist. Why don't you pick up where you left off there?
That's right. So I went into the press office, with this letter of introduction from a magazine that's been publishing on the region for 30 years. And the person in charge was extremely hostile, said he had not heard of the magazine, was very hostile, and would not give me credentials without giving any reason for it. So, being a journalist, I got out my notebook and started saying, "Oh, can you explain to me the process and why you're not allowing me to have credentials?" And he started saying, "Are you threatening me? I'll call the police. I'll have you arrested right now," for getting out my notebook to take notes about what he was telling me about their so-called process of credentialing reporters. So I quickly put it away and said, "Oh no," and left quickly. And when I got outside the door, I was really sort of shaking. It was very intense, a little bit frightening and bizarre. But in the end, again, all of this, I think, like you, this just made me more determined to, okay, then I'll find out what it is you don't want me to know and what it is you don't want Americans to know. And I'll get the facts as accurately as I can and spread them as widely as I can.
So that's your second trip. You determined to go ahead on this more specific path of if Americans knew?
Well, I'm not sure that, I'm trying to remember. That might not have been my second trip. I've taken I've gone about every few years since that time. Mm-hmm. So it was just on one of the trips. I thought, okay, let's do that. I'd heard that people sometimes had press credentials, so I thought, I guess I'll try to go and get them. But certainly early on, one of my trips, fairly early on, I did try to go in sort of partly in one case. This was only one case. I went on as both a journalist and an activist, where I was going to had a small delegation of people that were going to, this was in the early days of the International Solidarity Movement, ISM, where people would go and ride in an ambulance or be in a village very, very publicly as an American, a Palestinian ambulance or a Palestinian village. The hope was, the belief was, this is proved to be wrong, but the belief was that if Americans were there, the Israelis were less likely to shell that ambulance or that village, because if they killed
or run them over with a bulldozer.
Or run them over with a bulldozer, exactly. So the idea was that would prevent them from killing people, which would save Palestinian lives. And then, truthfully, that would also prevent them the reaction where there's retaliation, and it would also save Israeli lives. So I went with that intention, but also to be a journalist. I was, openly doing it. I was going to be reporting on it. I told lots of journalists in San Francisco where I was that I'd be glad to, give them firsthand reports while I was there. And when I got into when I landed at Ben Gurion, they took me into a room, interrogated me, did not allow me in, kept me there for about, I think it was 28 hours, and then deported me and said I would never be allowed back into Israel.
And you were going to literally throw your body on the gears, as Mario Savio, I think, famously said in California. If I may just roll back for a second, though, because you piqued my interest. That experience, that first time that you had them interviewing you, and when you got there, and they said that they weren't going to give you credentials, and then they got really nasty. I've heard this before, and it's kind of counterintuitive because we get it literally shoved down our throats, whether we like it or not over here, about the special relationship between the U.S. and Israel. It is so special, they don't even have to write it down, okay, that, we are so, with each other, and we're so supportive of each other, and we love each other, and all this stuff. Yet I hear that you could be the subject of some really nasty treatment, and the fact that you're American offers very little, if any, protection from this. I've heard this from multiple people, and even so far as Israeli officials say, "What, you think because you're American, you're going to get any special treatment?"
Absolutely, that's correct. You would think that you would. We have to, we're giving them over $10 million per day of our tax money. We've given that, this tiny country far more money than we've given any other country on earth. You would think that would give us some sort of decent treatment.
Respect, as Rodney Dangerfield would say.
That's right. But that's not the case. As I said, here I was over there as an American journalist, and he basically, was extremely, extremely rude and threatening and hostile. For Palestinian Americans or Arab Americans or Muslim Americans who are Americans, as we all know, just as, regardless of your race, religion, or ethnicity, we're all American citizens. That's not how they treat people there. I've learned from many people that are American citizens with American passports, but are Palestinian ancestry or were born in Palestine. They are treated, basically, figuratively, the American passport is spit on. I wouldn't be surprised if it's happened literally. I've never heard of that, but I would not be surprised. I truthfully would not, because the treatment of Americans is not the least bit respectful, not friendly, unless you're going to be just saying, okay, I'll just tell the U.S. whatever you want me to tell. I won't be.
Unless you're a Hasbara agent from the U.S.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think the degree of censorship of American journalism is very little known. That anybody that's over there as a reporter, a mainstream reporter, has accepted the fact that their reports will be censored. that this is how the system works. The military censors decide what's allowed to be reported and what is not allowed.
And they're trying to get it that way over here, too, it seems sometimes. So, final point here. You were there. You saw it face to face. I haven't been, and I haven't been the subject of this kind of treatment, but I can only imagine that if somebody is, a clerk behind a desk that punches your passport or something and can feel free to treat you so rudely, that this must be, if not policy, at least they don't seem to be very afraid of treating Americans so poorly. One would think that must be tacitly approved somewhere.
Probably, yes, probably. And I don't want to overstate it. Some people are polite. Some people are civil, so it's not that that's always the case. But, there is trying to think through, because I want to make sure I'm conveying accurately what it's like. It's a mixed population like others. So there are people of all different sorts. Some are friendly, some are polite. Many are not, especially officials. Some officials are, I can tell, embarrassed at what their government is doing. I was around some soldiers at the checkpoints would be extremely arrogant and obnoxious. Some, you could tell, were embarrassed at what they were part of, and I think ashamed of it. So there is a mix.
Well, right, yeah, and to be fair, I'm saying this from what I've heard about from other people, not just you, so and everyone's experience is a little different, but on some level, these do you feel that these people are just making it up and deciding, okay, today I'm going to be bad to this person because of what, or is there some sort of policy that they're following that, okay, based on certain guidelines, you say you're a journalist for a publication that we don't like, so we're going to give you a hard time, you're not allowed in?
Yeah, I think that's probably the policy. I think they're very, very guarded and very suspicious of people. And in this case, I don't think he even knew the publication. If he had known it, he would have known it covers it accurately, and therefore this official would not have liked it quite clearly. But I don't think he even knew that. I think it's, for that type of official, I think the fallback position is suspicion and hostility.
Well, and if you're going to deny journalists who are there to look for the truth and report on the truth, I don't blame anybody for not wanting to let a propaganda agent into their country, but clearly you're not that person, and I'm sure many people who travel there are not. Therein lies the problem. You're trying to block the truth. It's like, trying to hold back the tide. It's an impossible task. You think you can be successful for some time, but clearly this is something that happened to you in your life. The truth cannot be held back, can it? That's
right. It can't. Eventually it leaks out. Eventually it gets out more and more. In the last 14 years, I've seen more and more people. When I did this, I was really the only other American journalists I saw in Gaza on that trip was actually just one. He was also acting as a freelance photographer from Seattle, and it was on he was actually a professional photographer from a Seattle daily newspaper, but he was doing this on his vacation. He wasn't there, they hadn't sent him over to do this work. We were about the only two Americans that I saw spending time and traveling throughout Gaza as journalists at that time. Oh, there was one other who was a filmmaker. He also was an independent filmmaker making his first film ever, a young man named James Longley, who made an excellent film that maybe you've seen called Gaza Strip that came out, a few years later. He was there. There were sort of the three of us were there at one point.
Well, we're heading into break here. The music's starting. On the subject of filmmakers, are you familiar with the work of Yoav Shamir?
I'm trying to remember who that is.
His film Defamation.
Oh, yes, I am. Yes, that's quite strong.
It's a very good film, and he's an amazing person. Seems to have a great sense of humor. I've never spoken with him. I've communicated with him via email. He's a friend of Gilad Atzmann's, and I hope to have him on the show someday. But anyhow, can you stay with us for another couple of segments, Allison?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Thanks.
That's great. All right, friends. Allison, we're first time on the program. I urge you, I know many of you are familiar with her work already, but if you're not, please visit the website, ifamericansknew.org. And we just sort of set some parameters. There's a few things I'd like to ask Allison. Don't worry, she will be back on the show, I'm sure. And we're going to take a quick break, top of the hour. Tom Kiley, INN, will report right back after the beat. right, good friends, welcome back. Tom Kiley here, INN World Report Radio, Tuesdays and Thursday nights here on the Logos Radio Network. We're starting our second hour of tonight's program. Very, very happy to have with us Allison Weir from the organization that she started, If Americans Knew, ifamericansknew.org. And just a great, great service, getting the word out. It's a very, Allison, we spoke on the phone setting this interview up. I'm a bright guy. I'm a sharp guy. I get my hands on a lot of stuff. I read things. I dig into things. I'm doing this because of great journalists like Robert Parry, who wrote this book called The Lost History about the Iran-Contra situation and all. And I thought I knew a lot. And you know what? I just kind of was on autopilot when it came to Israel and Palestine. And I just sort of trusted a lot of stuff. I knew there were problems there. I knew that I wasn't getting the whole story, but all of this stuff. And I'm embarrassed to say that it took me many years before I literally woke up on the subject. Is that a common experience that you run into?
I think that's very common. That was certainly my experience. I think that's the experience with a lot of people, even people that have been politically active and are aware and, perhaps have been in anti-war movement previously. In my case, the Vietnam War, civil rights movement. So even some of us who, I then raised children and did other things, but I find that many, many people who know about a lot of subjects often have not focused on Israel-Palestine and have not known it. And the general public shows that that's definitely the case, where about 2/3 to 3/4 of the public will say that the U.S. should not take sides on the issue, which basically shows, it's sort of common sense. If you feel you don't know much about some particular subject matter and you stay out of it, you don't take a side. So I think that's about at least 3/4 of the American public doesn't have strong views on this because they've never really looked into it, don't feel they understand it.
And even that bit about not taking sides, I mean, we do take sides when there's a grave injustice. If all things were equal and it was a dispute between two parties that had a relatively equal footing, that would be one thing. But, in this case, sometimes, affirmative action, you have to take a side to rebalance the situation alone. And I think
the irony is that normally that does seem like a very sort of namby-pamby approach. Well, just don't take sides because, as you say, this is a hugely, there's one side that is really ethnically cleansing, literally the other side. But in this case, the fact that people don't want to take a side would be an excellent position and is supposedly a radical position, because that means we would stop our massive aid to Israel. We would stop vetoing international resolutions on behalf of Israel. Mm-hmm. Because, as you've noted, our government is taking a huge side. It's the Israeli side. So if we actually did what the general public wants, which is not take a side, we would stop the aid to Israel. We would stop vetoing resolutions. And that would be a very good position, because at that point we would stop fueling the violence that will never be solved as long as we're doing what we're doing now.
And interesting that you put it that way, because a neutral position would be light years better than what we've got now. Yet we've been sold on much less evil or terrible situation to get involved in the Middle East all over the place. The Arab Spring, it's a dictator, they hurt their people and everything else. So it's interesting, when it comes to Israel, it's a totally different set of rules. Why don't we move on a little bit? I think you've really helped us understand how you got started with this. If Americans Knew, the website, I know that you've got at least one book out now. How many have you authored? More than one book, or tell us about the books?
Yeah, this is the only book. I've written quite a few articles over the past 14 years, so I've got many articles, and we'll probably collect those into another book. I'm hoping, in fact, we'll do that this year. But the only book that I have out right now is called Against Our Better Judgment, The Hidden History of How the U.S. Was Used to Create Israel. It was published, I guess, a little over a year ago. And it goes into, it's how the U.S.-Israel, quote, special relationship was created. And in writing this book, I was astounded at what I learned. What has been going on in this country, where I grew up, where my parents grew up, where some of my grandparents and great-grandparents, going back quite a ways, grew up, that I had no idea about, that there was this really fanatic movement that ended up creating Israel and using the United States to do that. So, this is my one book, and I'm excited to have, it's very short. It's getting a very strong, very, very good response, even though has not been reviewed by any mainstream media. Of course, it hasn't been talked about by any mainstream media. Even Democracy Now! Has not mentioned it.
Democracy when?
So, I hope people.
There's a lot. Don't feel bad. There's a lot of subjects that Democracy Now! Is loath to touch. We here in New York City at INN, right down the street from Democracy Now!, literally only a couple of blocks away when we got started. We actually helped Democracy Now! Get onto Free Speech TV back in the early days through the internet connections that we knew how to do and stuff. And we've had interaction with them. But they, in fact, oddly enough, and this is important. You mentioned it earlier, and I'll go back to it again. Surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly anymore, even the alternative media, the alternative liberal media, left media, where one would expect to have these kinds of issues dealt with, does not deal with them. And that was an inspiration for us at INN. Here in New York, we're a bunch of lefty liberals, but and we said, hey, who do we think we are to get started with alternative media? You've got Amy Goodman, all these luminaries, and we analyzed the subject, and we found out that they were partisan. They were preaching to the converted. And so we decided, no, INN is going to be transpartisan. We speak with everybody, and that's the only thing that's going to solve our problems in the world as well as in the country.
I agree. I feel very strongly that's so important to try to speak to everybody, try to give everybody this information, especially all Americans. It's our tax money that Israel's using and American weaponry that Israel's using. So I feel it's our obligation to tell every American possible about what's going on and just give everybody the facts as clearly as we can. And I was very
go ahead.
Just one point when maybe I mentioned when I first got involved in this, one of the things that really shocked me is I did think that the left and the progressive, side of the spectrum had been talking about this. I had been raising children and not very politically active nationally for a number of years. And I thought, certainly they're addressing this issue. And I discovered that was not the case at all. They were very much part of the cover-up.
Far from addressing it, Hasbara, covering it up. Yeah. It's very interesting because, this, like you say, one would think that on the left that there would be a more sort of a sympathetic ear toward this sort of thing, but it isn't. But it's a rude awakening in many respects. It sort of shows what is actually happening in our country. And ironically, I think, we've actually stumbled on maybe a question I wanted to get to anyway, and maybe it's through your book. You have been now picked out for, I suspect talking about these issues like how we got involved in wars and so forth, has rankled some people. And now you've become a target, it seems, by some of the people who would rather not have some of this information out there. Is that a fair assessment?
That's definitely what's going on. I'm in the sort of unfortunate position, but I think it's a valuable one of sort of being a litmus test, because what we're finding is, especially once I wrote this book that's completely cited, all the information is covered in citations and endnotes, but it's very strong information about the Zionist movement in the United States, about the role of Louis Brandeis, our celebrated Supreme Court justice, about Felix Frankfurter, another Supreme Court justice, about their connections to the U.S. entry into World War I. This is very strong information that I didn't create. I just read all of these books and discovered it, and now I'm sharing it with others. But there are groups within what has been called the Palestine Solidarity Movement, Jewish Voice for Peace in particular, who clearly do not want this information to get to the general public. So they have basically tried to excommunicate me. They've blacklisted me or have tried to blacklist me from this movement for justice, even though If Americans Knew has taken really very principled positions on this issue from the very beginning, unlike JVP, whose positions have sort of been less than wholehearted, I feel, in terms of principles. So the good news is that many, many people have ended up supporting me and If Americans Knew. So I think ultimately we're getting probably more support than my attackers are getting. But my attackers have much more money and much more power. So it's been a very strange experience.
Yeah, I mean, I guess inadvertently you're serving as the canary in the coal mine, who's waking us up to these things that have been, Gilad Atzmon talks about it. He comes on the show and he talks about it. The anti-Zionists, it's a strange thing. It's tribal is a good word, I suppose, to use for it. There's a sort of a base level that you can get to, and then all bets are off, it seems, and the two-state solution, which I've come to educate myself into feeling that this is not correct. I think a one-state solution is correct, and people have to learn how to live in a democracy. We're told Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East, so we have to support it. Well, it's not really functioning like a democracy, is it?
No, definitely not. And it's not a democracy for its non-Jewish citizens. It's, many people have said this, and it's quite true. If you're a Christian or a Muslim, which is almost 20% of the population, because even though in 1948 and beyond, they ethnically cleansed, at least 750,000 people, it's probably 1 million people altogether. It's still a remnant of that original population. The large majority were Muslim and Christian. There's still that remnant within the state of Israel itself, so it's close to 20%. And for that 20%, it is not a democracy. It is, a very segregated system, a very unfair system, a very, very discriminatory system. And this has been documented quite thoroughly.
And, Allison, here in the 21st century, it's a glaring, this is real, 18th century kind of stuff, this is, and I guess people got away with it for a long time. I don't see how you can get away with it unless you're relying on racism and that sort of thing, which is, clearly, thank goodness, the human race is waking up and discarding that finally. But unfortunately, we only have a few seconds left. So we'll be right back, friends. We're speaking with Allison Weir. We're going to have one more segment with her just after this.
This is the Logos Radio Network.
All right, good friends. Very, very happy to be speaking with Allison Weir from If Americans Knew. I know a lot of you know about Allison and her work. I got some good email responses from people very happy that she was going to be coming on the show. It's long overdue. Allison, we have about one more segment here. Is there anything that you would like to add to our discussion tonight, A, and B, hopefully you can come back on sooner rather than later and we can expand on what we've started?
Well, I guess there's so much to talk about, but this is I think it's so important for people to be aware of how significant the Israeli-Palestinian issue is. Because there are, as I said earlier, there are many, many important issues around the world and in our own country, many cases of violence and injustice. But this issue, I feel, is especially important for three reasons, I guess. One is it's been going on such a long time. It's been going on over half a century and many of us didn't even start addressing it until recently. It's where more of our tax money goes to this one than almost anywhere else. And thirdly, this is the focus. This is the central issue of the Middle East. Because of Israel, and this is covered very well by a number of authors, Israeli partisans are the primary factor, I feel, in why we invaded Iraq and destroyed Iraq. In destroying Iraq, we created huge instability in the region. That has led to Syria, to Libya to a degree, the war against terror to a degree. What we see with ISIS is very related to what happened with Iraq, which was related to Israel. So and then the loss of civil liberties in the United States is connected to all that. The hostility against the United States from people within the region of the Middle East and many other places. Surveys will consistently show it's because of our support for Israeli violence and Israeli criminality.
Well, if I could add to that list, I think there's whenever you're defending something that's not kosher, if you can pardon the pun, when you're defending a lie, when you're trying to whitewash a lie, and so it gets harder and harder to do. Eventually it becomes like Lucy in the Chocolate Factory. There's just so many places the truth will come out that in order to cover that truth, it's a very corrosive influence on so many, many things, and particularly in this country, to cover up that story, because I think Americans, apropos the name of your site, if Americans knew, Americans are good people. Israelis, who are not having to be part of this thing, Palestinians are good people. There's good people all over the world. Somehow that has to be covered up. There has to be lies to do that, and to do that, it requires money, influence, and corrosiveness, and that's a big cost as well, I think.
That's
on our
true.
system.
I agree. It's the Israel lobby has just caused, great damage to the United States. It's not the only thing that has. There are many other issues that have, I'm sure we've all worked on before. But the Israel lobby is so powerful, and it's not just AIPAC. There, if you go to our website, you'll see a long list of multi-million-dollar organizations and billionaires that are part of this lobby have made it so that you cannot run for president of the United States without swearing allegiance to Israel. You cannot, in many cases, you cannot even run for the Senate or the House of Representatives without swearing allegiance to Israel. It often goes down to the state legislatures, where they're pushing through all this legislation in the state legislatures on behalf of Israel. Often even on city councils. This is preventing people of integrity from taking principled stands. In fact, I think it's eliminating people of integrity from representing America.
Well, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Isn't that the goal, to eliminate people of integrity? If you're going to prop up a lie, that in and of itself, by necessity, would have to eliminate people of integrity.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And we know there are lots of lobbies, so this is, isn't only the Israel lobby, but the Israel lobby is at least the second most powerful lobby in the United States. And I think there's a good argument.
It is, I would say it's the most powerful lobby in the United States when it comes to foreign policy. Yeah, we've got the gun lobby, we've got AARP, but those are domestic issues. It is the preeminent lobby when it comes to foreign policy. Representative Cynthia McKinney is a friend of the show, been on many, many times, and she has the story. Have you heard her story where she said she didn't even get sworn in yet, and the facts came with the pledge to Israel?
Yes, that's right. This is just what's going on, and the fact that people don't know this. This kind of information is so extremely important, and yet it's so covered up that, once you see what's going on, once your eyes are open, you see a lot more in this country that's all connected to this.
Well, speaking of connected, I'd like you to get me a copy of this book because I want to take a look at it, and then I want to have you back on the show because I suspect, Allison, you've got some pretty explosive information in there. And unfortunately, it shouldn't be explosive. It should be well known. But, I've been educating myself about the Balfour Declaration and what happened during World War I and the Zionists movement and so forth. By the way, speaking of which, I think I sent you some links. We did a very, very interesting presentation here in New York last May with Gilad Atzmon and Reverend Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro on the subject of Judaism and Zionism. Did you get a chance to take a look at that?
I didn't, but I heard about that. I didn't realize you were connected because I had heard about that and I'd looked at it a little bit at the time and it seemed very interesting.
Well, that was my thing. Okay, that was because this information is so important. I connected Rabbi Shapiro with Gilad Atzmon. I said, Rabbi, did you ever hear this guy Gilad Atzmon? He said, hear of him. I read his book. So we had the pastrami together in a kosher deli on Broadway in the Garment District one day, and it was great. It's like a PhD level discourse. I said, friends, we have to put this in front of people. But anyway, and they talked about early Zionism, and this is really heavy-duty stuff. I mean, World War I, if you win World War I, you get the Ottoman Empire, you can control Palestine, quid pro quo, all of that sort of thing implied. It's very, very important information, and I believe it's covered in your book, and I believe it's become a lightning rod to make you become attacked for talking about it.
That's what many people think. I mean, Max Blumenthal, who's quite well known, wrote some very good books, one or two about Palestine, has been misrepresenting who I am and what I've written. And I think he does not, it makes me wonder what he's doing or why he's doing what he does. So clearly the book is a lightning rod. People, there are many people that don't want anybody to read this book or to even know it exists. And I think it's a lot of the information you were mentioning. It's a short book. It doesn't go into detail about any of those things, but it has a lot of factual information and the citations where people can look into it more thoroughly. And I only use what I feel are reliable sources. There are other sources that
may I add, oftentimes in these cases, Allison, these are Jewish sources.
Very often, yes.
That speak more eloquently than anybody else. I mean, these are sources that are boasting about their prowess in these different fields.
That's right. Many of the authors are pro-Israel. But they do give very interesting factual information about how Israel achieved what it has achieved. And some of it was done openly, some of it was done covertly.
And to my knowledge, I might be mistaken, but I thought I had this right. The president of the United States lives on Pennsylvania Avenue. Well, we all know that. The prime minister of Great Britain lives at 10 Downing Street. As I understand it, the prime minister of Israel lives on Balfour Street or Balfour Avenue or something like that. That says a lot, doesn't it?
It does. And but it's interesting because the Balfour Declaration was actually not even written by Lord Balfour.
Well, briefly, it was supposed to be between Lord Balfour and Lord Rothschild, right?
That's right. Right. And they often leave out that was to Lord Rothschild, who was a British Zionist leader.
Yeah, and a very powerful figure in British history. So, Allison, I want to thank you so much for your work, what you're doing. Please continue. Please know that there's a lot of people who are indebted to you for waking them up, and I hope you can get some strength from that. I'd like a copy of the book. I want to go over it, and we'll have you right back on as soon as I can do that. How's that?
I'd love to do that. We'll be sending you a copy of the book right away. I meant to do that before, and I'm sorry I completely forgot.
No, that's fine. I'll send you my address for that. IfAmericans.org. Anything else you'd like to tell people where to go to find more information or anything?
I should mention that I'm also president of the Council for the National Interest, which has an excellent website called councilforthenationalinterest.org. That was started.
Once upon a time, your printer was not a privacy risk, but today's printers are often connected to Wi-Fi networks, making them a treasure trove for hackers. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, back with details on the potential spy in your office. Next.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Hacking somebody through their printer sounds like an urban legend, but now that printers have hard drives, email capacity, and are connected to the internet, they've become attractive to attackers. Here's an example. Samsung printers sold up until October 2012 had a security flaw that lets hackers send fake faxes, copy sensitive documents, and spy on you or your company by eavesdropping on your Wi-Fi traffic. Yikes! Your best defense is to change the default password, add antivirus and malware protection, and get that printer behind a firewall. If you don't, you could be the next victim. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
Live Free Speech Radio, LogosRadioNetwork.com.
Something's wrong! Man, I swear something's wrong. Something's wrong! I don't think I'll be around here long.
Something's wrong. That's right, and that's why we play that song, because something's wrong, and we're going to try to fix it together, right? That's what INN World Report Radio is all about. I bet that's what a lot of y'all are all about. I know that's what Deborah Stevens and the Logos Radio Network is all about. Speaking of which, there's a fundraiser going on right now. We ask that you go by the website. Now, come on, friends. I listen to a lot of different sources, and a lot of them are listener-supported and that sort of thing, and they have their fund drives, and we rarely talk about that here on this program. Maybe other parts of the shows on this network do talk about it. But, you've been listening to this show for a long time. If you like it and if you want to support it, it would be wonderful if you could, reach into your pocket, send a little something to Logos Radio Network. It's not going to go to me. It's not going to go to salaries and so forth. It goes to equipment to bring the show to you. There's servers involved. There's internet connections that have to be paid for and all of that sort of thing. And, from time to time, once or twice a year, we like to ask you to dig in and put it out there. Yes, there's some advertising, but it's really not that much. It's not enough money, clearly. And we're reaching into our pockets doing this show by, just putting our time into it, our effort. Many, many hours are spent every week researching, contacting guests for you, reading books, reading articles, finding new guests for you and having them on the show. And I don't know. I wish there was a better economic model. And that sort of thing. But in the time being, it's either listener supported or advertisers or a little both. And that's what we try to do. So, even a few bucks, it all helps. It would be great. And plus, it'd probably make you feel good too, but make you stronger, have you a stronger connection to the program. Think about it. I like to think of our show as an open university. I am educating myself. And I figured out a way to do that in front of everyone, as an open sort of thing.
Okay.
Hello, Ellen, are you there?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, great. I'm sorry. We had a little bit of a problem connecting. All right, friends, I'm going to get off that soapbox and get on another one. We're going to speak now with Ellen Brown. And Ellen, thank you so much for coming on kind of short notice also. We have you on probably at least once a month, maybe more, and because of your great writings. But I had to ask you to come on. Friends, we're speaking with Ellen Brown, author of Web of Debt, and the great advocate for banking, public banking. Ellen, you had this great article. It was like a clarion call. It looks like, and I do things in my head. I heard Beethoven's Fifth Symphony start. Dun, 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 right? It was like, is it true that Congress is finally having to do the right thing and go to the Fed and say, hey, let's have some money at no interest or low interest, and we need it for infrastructure?
Right. That is what they're doing, which is quite radical, even though it's not a huge amount of money. It's $305 billion for infrastructure. They've been arguing about it for a decade, and Congress, both parties agree that our infrastructure is falling apart, that other countries are passing us up, that we desperately need to put money into infrastructure, but they couldn't agree on how to fund it. So finally, they got the bright idea that instead of, they wouldn't raise taxes or hit up social programs, they would hit up the Federal Reserve instead. They're not actually doing quantitative easing, which is what I think they should do, which is just print the money that they need. But they are taking a portion of the Fed's reserve, their capital surplus, which they don't even need. It's essential. It has the power to print money, so they don't need the surplus. And they're taking a portion of the dividend that they have paid to their shareholders, which are all banks. The Federal Reserve is composed of 12 branches, all of which are 100% owned by the banks in their district, and they all get dividends as if they were stockholders. So they've been getting a 6% dividend every year since 1913. And now they've dropped that down to the interest that you would get on a 10-year treasury. So right now I think it's about 2.2%. So they've radically reduced what they're giving to the banks in dividends. I mean, obviously the banks get all kinds of other perks. They're not in there for the dividends. It's just extra gravy for them. And they're tapping into their surplus funds. But
let me guess, Ellen. Let me guess. These dividends come from interest that's been paid by you and I, either through our own credit or through our taxes as interest on the debt, or through the built-in cost of lending in the goods and services we buy. Is that a good guess?
Well, the Federal Reserve makes money on things like if they buy bonds, then they get to keep the interest on the bonds. But they rebate that money. They rebate their profits to the federal government. But first, they deduct their costs. And among their costs is this 6% dividend that they've been giving to the big banks ever since for the last century. So it's where the Fed gets their profits. They don't get it directly from, they're not making home loans there, but they do buy federal bonds, which is, we're the taxpayers. We pay the interest on the bond.
And let me guess, if they can afford to, what did you say, they're taking it from like 6% down to 2% or something? And
the dividend, yeah.
Yeah, so if that's supposed to be a cost, obviously they could have done without it if they're doing without it now. I mean, how much does it cost, to run a computer?
That's money that would have gone back to the taxpayers, and now it will. I mean, now it's going into infrastructure, yeah.
So we've got a Republican-controlled Congress, a Republican-controlled Senate. How the heck did it ever get past those folks? One would think that they'd be dead set against this.
Well, I think because there was you see our bridges falling apart. Some of those bridges are really dangerous. Like there are bridges that trains go over every day in Pennsylvania that are all set to collapse. And so they've got to get the money from somewhere, and they don't want to, they're all against raising the debt ceiling and all those things that, they won't agree on anything else. So they finally compromised on this, which is a third way. Like there's a deep pocket. Let's go for the Fed's deep pocket.
And a couple of things you mentioned before. We're the laughing stock of the world. China is brand new compared to us now, right? And Chinese are embarrassed when they come over here. They're
just to go to Europe because the trains are so good. I mean, everything works so well. Oh my
goodness! They got rubber wheels on the trains and the subways in Munich. It's quiet. Here, I'll send you pictures. Now that I have this smartphone and I can take pictures of it, I'm taking pictures of the rotten New York City subways. And under Bloomingdale's, Bloomingdale's supposed to be a fancy department store. It's garbage. It's rats. It's, leaky pipes staining tiles and and it's just a sad statement how we've been led to believe that we don't have money and we can't do this. And yet there's more money than ever at the top.
You don't need to have money. This government should be the issuer of money. That's the way it was. That was what made the colonies great. That's where they got their money. They printed the money. in order to do infrastructure, build roads, et cetera, all the things that you expect a government to do. And everybody thinks that that's going to be inflationary. But as several studies have shown, which I cited in that article, if you put in $1 trillion into infrastructure, you will get back $2.3 trillion in GDP, or I guess those numbers are a bit high, but let's say for every dollar you put into infrastructure, you get about $2.3 back in increased gross domestic product, which means you're getting more products. So you're getting twice as much in the way of goods or supply as the demand that you put out there. So you've got twice as much in the way of goods as the money that you put out to make these goods. So you're actually going to lower the price, not raise the price, because you've got too little money chasing too many goods, not the other way around, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah. Webster Tarpley points that out. Inflation is not just too much money, it's too little goods. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ellen, but I don't know if anybody's been in a drugstore in the last 20 years. There are so many goods falling off the shelves, wrapped in shiny little foil packets from India and then China and stuff. It's ridiculous. There's more stuff to buy than ever before. All right, we'll be right back with Ellen Brown.
Easy.
Good friends, coming down the home stretch with Ellen Brown, and I asked Ellen to come back because this is a really momentous development. But before we continue with Ellen, let me remind you, Thursday night, the return of Gordon Duff, senior editor at Veterans Today. This is a guy that knows all about the kind of activity that happened in Benghazi with those contractors. There's a film out now called 13 Hours. It's very important because this was the State Department that was run by Hillary Clinton, and apparently she said some lies about this whole thing that a lot of people are very upset about. I had to go see the movie myself. It's an impressively made film, but my go-to person on that sort of thing is Gordon Duff, so he'll be here to talk about that and a lot of other things on Thursday night. Now, back with Ellen Brown. Ellen, we were talking on the break. This is crazy to me. This bugaboo, I don't know, this bugaboo about you can't create money because it's going to be inflationary and all the rest of it. That's nonsense, because if you get something for that money in return, which causes you to save money and other places save pollution, if the government created the money, we need a new Hudson River crossing. It's not since the 40s that we had the George Washington Bridge. It takes hours to get across the Hudson River on a Friday night.
Right.
If we had that, there would be less traffic jams. People would be home with their families or into work earlier. The productivity would go up. You wouldn't be polluting so much. People would have a job making this. Contractors would have a job hiring the workers to do it and directing it. Architects would have a job. Engineers would have a job. Steelmakers would have a job. And then painters and everybody else and toll collectors to, ad infinitum to maintain this thing. There'd be plenty of work. There'd be plenty of things to do. People's lives would be better. And it wouldn't be printing money for nothing. We would have a durable good that would last 50, 60, 100 years. So exactly. Why is this so hard to understand? Is it really hard to understand, or are there evil people who don't want to see progress for the most of us?
I would say it's both. But right, we've got the people, we've got the workers, we've got the materials. Why can't we get them together to build these things? The only thing we're missing is some money. But what is money? It's merely you're not going to get these people to work for free. So you put them to work for us. We the people need a bridge built. So here, we're going to give you these little tokens that represent the work you put into it. So you can go spend those in the economy, and I'll acknowledge those as money. And then it'll come back to the government somewhere in the form of taxes. The government will accept them as taxes, and that's what gives them their value, allows them to keep their value. But I think we've just been hit with this hyperinflation myth for so long that if people are afraid of that, they immediately say, oh, that's printing money. That's just going to inflate the system, which it would if it was going into the casino, which is where it does go now.
That's where it's going. Yeah,
exactly. So that does tend to hyperinflate. But if you put it into real things, like you say, that's where it should go. It should be a token representing goods and services.
It's the monetization of somebody's labor, you know?
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
what money should do.
Society pats you on the back. Thank you for building this bridge. You know what? We don't know what you want. We don't know if you like eggs or if you like fish or if you like whatever. But you know what? Here's this token that monetizes your labor, and you go spend it on what you want. And trust me, there's plenty of people out there that'll accept it.
Yeah, that's how we got paper money in the first place. There was a governor of Massachusetts in 1691, I think, who was fighting a border war and didn't have any money to pay the soldiers. So he got this idea that he would just pay them in these little receipts, acknowledging their service. And of course, everybody acknowledged that the soldiers had done good work. So they all accepted these receipts, and they were supposedly good in the payment of taxes. So they circulated around and came back eventually, and that worked really well.
I don't know why, Ellen, we can't make our own New York City currency and pay.
Well, because there is a constitutional amendment against it. But you should be able to, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, we're probably a lot bigger than some countries in the world. If we had our own currency, we could pay all of our city workers with it. And, the other beauty of this, Ellen, is that, trust me, I know a lot of restaurateurs. I know a lot of, entrepreneurs. They throw food out sometimes. You know what I mean? People have goods on the shelf that sit there for a really long time. Taxi cabs are not always full. Right? They have downtime. The people would love to exchange that surplus and that downtime for some kind of currency, which they could then turn around and pay their taxes with. They could monetize their waste.
Right.
It'd be wonderful.
Yeah. They have these international trade groups that basically trade their surpluses, and they trade. I mean, they get a lot of exchanges going with goods and services that were otherwise just sitting on the shelf that nobody wanted. Nobody wanted them because nobody had the money. But
right.
Yeah, but yeah.
I even heard where they're doing this in Africa and places where there's local scripts, and people are thrilled because they're monetizing the downtime in their goods and services that they have. Taxi drivers, for instance. They're happy to accept this money because, now they're fully booked all the time. And the same gas that they're burning, driving around looking for people is now, driving around with a passenger.
Uh-huh. Well, there's another way that states could issue their own money, and that's to own a bank. And that's what public banking is all about, because 97% of the money supply, according to the Bank of England, is generated by banks when they make loans.
Yeah.
So if you, the state, set up your own bank, put all your revenues in it as deposits, you have a huge deposit base that you get instantly without, no work. You it's just an accounting function. Shift your revenues over into your own bank. Now you're allowed to create loans equal to, say, 70% of that, being conservative. So you're just creating money out of nothing. That's what banks do. They just create these loans on their books, digital money, and they're allowed to do that, to create loans that are equal to, well, technically 90% of their actual pool of money that's there. So they've lent out the same money that the depositors think they own. But it works because the depositors only come about 10% of the time. And if more than 10% come, then
the central bank will step in.
Yeah, or first of all, you can borrow from the other banks, and then if you can't get it from the other banks, then the central bank steps in. Yeah, so if a state did that, would set up its own publicly owned bank and kept the profits, you could generate a lot of extra money.
And yet we're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to even think about that, right? Listening to you here, Ellen, I'm a philosopher. I meditate. I think about things. Tell me if I'm wrong, but isn't it useful to just look at credit and look at it for what it really is, which is the creation of money against somebody's future earnings?
Right.
I mean, in other words, it's like you are going to earn. You're going to earn over the next 30 years. You're going to earn $500,000. So you know what? We're going to front you that $500,000 that you're going to earn in the future, so you can buy this house for $200,000 and $300,000 and the interest and everything else, and pay us back. So all they're doing is they're creating the money that you're going to work for in the future, and they're giving it to you right now. Now you got to go out and scratch and get that money, and then of course they're not creating the interest either. But isn't that what credit is? It's merely, and it's a Ponzi scheme, because if you're constantly creating this money that doesn't, that's going to monetize your future labor, at a certain point, you just have to keep that going. Why not just create money more intelligently?
Yeah. Well, right now they will only make loans against, say, a house or something they can foreclose on. They want an asset that if you don't pay, they're going to grab that and get their money anyway. They're going to sell it. But what they should do, and what a state-owned bank could do, or a publicly owned bank could do, and does do in other countries, is merely extend credit based on future productivity. In other words, extend the credit, say, for infrastructure. There's no house that you put up in order to get the loan for this infrastructure. You just put the money out there, you pay the workers, pay the materials, and then the infrastructure itself pays the loan back. Let's say you built a dam or something, or built a train. Yeah.
That's another thing that really gets my gut. Why should these bankers be entitled to a something for the nothing that they lost? Okay? If they've conjured the money from nowhere, how do they get a tangible asset in exchange for that if you don't pay them back? Wouldn't it be more sane to say, okay, this is a public function. This is in the Constitution. We've given it to you, this private sector resource to manage. Okay. You're not entitled to this house because you didn't lose anything. The house should be given back to the people somehow, auctioned off, or it should be returned to the government. They didn't lose anything when they didn't get the money. Why did they get the house?
Well, it is a tricky question because they do have to balance their books. That's the thing. But they're balancing their books with money that was created in some bank, maybe not their bank. Yeah. So they create the money, it goes into another bank, and then they borrow it back. But they keep all these balls in the air, and so that's their justification.
You're right. If it was a frozen fixed system, that would be one thing, but it has to grow all the time anyway, right?
Yeah, and no, agreed. And I think if it's a public system, then we would get the profits. We could direct where this credit went. And we can keep them from doing risky things like this whole derivatives casino.
Well, listen, Ellen, that's all the time we have. When should we circle back with you to see how this is developing?
I'm actually in February. I'm going to speak in Iceland, London, Manchester, UK, and Wales, and I'll be back in March.
So we'll touch base with you then. Have a great trip. All right, friends. Gordon Duff on Thursday night.